In the name of Allah, the most compassionate, the most merciful, and may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon His last and beloved Messenger Muhammad, and may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon you all. This is the 16th part of a series entitled Discoveries from the Quran. And in this series I show, with the guidance of Allah, the superiority of the knowledge of Allah God Almighty in the Quran over the knowledge of people in all branches of knowledge, and how a believer can be a teacher of others by pondering upon the verses of the last revelation to people of the Quran. Now, among the topics for this part is the one you see on the screen: how to derive scientific laws from the Quran. How to derive scientific laws from the Quran. Now, what I mean by this is that in engineering, in science, we use laws. And these laws, they are equations, or they are description for the interaction between the different parts in the universe, in the creation. So for example, here we have law of heat conduction, here we have diffusion laws, motion laws, and so forth. The question is, can we derive these laws from the Quran, from the Book of Allah? The answer is yes, because Allah states in the Quran that He has left nothing out of the Quran, so it includes the knowledge of everything. So we should be able to derive scientific laws from the Quran. And I will show you how, by pondering upon 3 verses from the Quran only 3 verses. So to start, if we ponder upon verse number 12 of chapter 17 of the Quran, this is translation: and Allah God has appointed the night and the day as 2 signs. Then Allah God has obliterated the sign of the night, while Allah God has made the sign of the day illuminating, that you may seek bounty from your Lord, and that you may know the number of the years and the reckoning. And Allah God has detailed everything with full details. So if you ponder upon the last words in this verse, and Allah God has detailed everything with full details. So we learn from this that this universe, this creation, Allah created it and detailed everything, meaning that nothing is left for chance. Everything is detailed, and from scientific terms, that Allah governed the interaction between different parts of this universe. So for example, the sun and the earth, the interaction between them is with full details, nothing by chance. So we learn from this that there should be laws that Allah placed to govern the interaction between different parts of the universe. Now, the second verse to ponder upon is verse number 19 of chapter 15 of the Quran, which reads: and the earth Allah God has spread out, and has placed therein fair mountains, and caused to grow therein all kinds of things in due balance. So here Allah is telling us that this creation, everything is in due balance, meaning it's a balanced creation. It's a balanced creation. Balanced. And from scientific terms, what do we mean by a balanced, what we understand by a balanced creation? Meaning that a balanced system, the sum of inputs is equal to sum of outputs for a system to be balanced. For example, your body, it's a balanced system. The amount of heat generated by your cells should be equal to the amount of heat dissipated from your body. Because if the amount of heat generated by your cells and your muscles, if the amount of heat is more than the amount of heat dissipated from your body, then you will burn. And if the amount of heat removed from your body is greater than the one generated, you will freeze. So for your body to be balanced, the sum of inputs should be equal to the sum of outputs. So in scientific terms, we can say this, that the property of a balanced system, as you can see here, that the sum of outputs should be equal to sum of inputs. Sum of outputs equals sum of inputs for a system to be balanced. And that explains why in all scientific laws you have the equal sign, the equality sign. Why do you have this sign? Because Allah tells us that everything is balanced. So it makes sense that when we derive laws, there is a right term and a left term, and they are equal, because everything in the creation of Allah is balanced. Now the last verse to ponder upon in order to derive these laws is verse number 7 of chapter 55 of the Quran, which reads: and the heaven He has raised it high, and He has set up the scale. So Allah is telling us here that He has raised the heaven high, meaning that there is an indication here for the creation of the universe. Then He has set up the scale. If you ponder upon this, what do you understand by He has set up the scale? The scale is it has a right term and a left term. A scale, any scale, like the one used to weigh things. It has a right side and a left side, and they're equal. So this scale is a scale that governs the interaction of different parts in the universe. So to put it in a scientific term, here is the scale, the one right here. And since Allah is telling us that everything is balanced in His creation, so we will put, this is the way we derive scientific laws from the Quran. We put on let's say the right side, we put the sum of inputs to the system, and on the left side we put the sum of outputs. And for any scale to be straight, we put weights on one side. We put weights on one side to make it leveled. So let me explain. This is the way how to derive laws from the Quran. This one right here. Now let me explain how we can learn laws by giving examples. I think it's better by giving examples to make it easier. So let's take in civil engineering. Here we have a column, a pillar, and it's subjected to a force, F. So a column, like the one in your house, and it's subjected to a weight, load F. We want to derive the equation that governs the system, a column under a compressive force. Very easy. We put the scale, the one that was mentioned in the Quran. On the right side, we put the inputs, which is the force in this case, on the system. On the left side, we put the outputs, which is the displacement. Because when you put a force on a column, you see it gets shorter. The column gets shorter, meaning a displacement. Now, we multiply the inputs by a weight, which is the weight is the relationship between the inputs and the outputs. In our case, is the stiffness of the column. Because if you have, let's say, 200 newtons, and you have a column which is from steel or a column from plastic, the one from steel will be displaced less. Why? Because of stiffness. So we see that as we increase the stiffness, for the same force, the amount of displacement decreases. So it's an inverse relationship between the weight and the output. If this is the case, then we put the weight in the denominator. We put the weight in the denominator. So we have 1 over stiffness multiplied by the force equal to displacement. Just arranging the law, we have the force which is equal to displacement multiplied by stiffness. The force is equal to kx. Force is equal to stiffness multiplied by displacement. This law that we derive from the Quran in a matter of minutes, it's a very famous law. It's called the Hooke's law, or the law of the spring. And it took people years to develop it from the Quran in a matter of minutes. Let me give another example. Here we have an example in electrical engineering. If we have a wire, a conductor, and we subject it to a voltage difference, delta V, we see that as a system, there is a current that flows through it, a current I. We want to derive the equation that governs the system. A conductor subjected to a voltage difference, there is a current that flows through it. We put the scale, as you can see here. On the right side, we put the input to the system, which is the delta voltage, the voltage difference. On the left side, we put the output, which is the current. We multiply the input by the weight that makes the scale leveled. In this case, the resistance of the wire. The higher the resistance, the lesser the current for the same voltage difference. So it's an inverse relationship. So we put 1 over the resistance in the denominator. So the law becomes 1 over R multiplied by delta V is equal to I. So the law becomes delta V, the voltage difference, equal to IR. And this is a very famous law in electrical engineering. It's called Ohm's law. A very famous one. Another example. In mechanical engineering, if you place a body having a weight W at a certain height h, what's noticed that this body gains some energy. When you elevate an object to a higher place, it gets more energy. It's called potential energy. So once you derive this law, again, putting the scale, very easy. The inputs is the weight of the body, the output, the potential energy. The weight is the relationship between them is the height. Now, the bigger the height, the more energy you have. So it's a proportional relationship between the two. So put it in the numerator. So we have the potential energy is equal to weight multiplied by the height. So this is the law of potential energy as derived from the Quran. So you can see, very easy, and you can see how Allah teaches us how to learn every law in His creation. Now let me give another example. In thermal engineering, if we have a wall, let's say this is a wall, right? A wall, and this wall has a certain area and it has a certain thickness, let's say T, and I'm using the same terminology as found in textbooks to make it easy, to make it closer, the idea. So here you have a wall having an area A and a thickness T, and we put a temperature here, let's say T1, and you have a temperature here T2, a temperature difference on both sides of the wall. What we notice that heat will flow, let's say heat is Q, from the higher temperature to lower temperature. So in this case T1 is larger than T2. So we see that heat flows. We want to derive the equation for the system based on the Quranic technique. Very easy. We put the scale. Here we have the scale, right? We have, this is the scale, this is the left side and the right side. So on the left side we put the outputs from the system, and in this case is the heat flow, Q. And the input is the temperature difference, delta T. Now we multiply the inputs by the weights. Now the first weight in this case is the area of the wall. The bigger the area of the wall, for the same temperature difference, we have more heat or a higher rate of heat flow. So we increase the area, the amount of heat that flows within the wall increases. So we put in the numerator. So we put A over 1. Then we multiply. Even if we have 1,000 weights, we keep doing the same procedure. Now the thickness of the wall. The thicker the wall, the lesser the amount of heat that will go through it. So it's an inverse relationship, which we put in the denominator. So it becomes 1 over the thickness. Now, the other weight is the ability of the wall to conduct heat. The more able the wall is to conduct heat, then the more heat will flow. So let's say this is K, a certain kind of symbol for the ability of the wall to conduct heat. Now the more able the wall to conduct heat, the higher the rate of heat flow. So we put it in the numerator, so it's K over 1. So just arrange the equation. You have Q equals K A delta T over thickness, and this is a very famous law. It's called Fourier's law for heat conduction. This is the law of heat conduction, right? So this law, we derived it in a matter of minutes from the Quran. It took Fourier a long period of time to derive this law. So as you can see, my sisters, Allah, God Almighty, gave us in the Quran how to be strong and how to be the teacher of others in all areas of knowledge. So we need to teach this to people so that they will see the glory of the Quran and the power of the knowledge of Allah in the Quran, and that will be a way for them to believe in this book and to have happiness in this life and the hereafter. And to know more details about this topic, please visit my website at www.quran-miracle.com. This is the website, and you can email me at zquran@gmail.com. And may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon you all.